amazing to look around, and I think it speaks to this conference that as I look at the audience, I'm like, half of the people in the audience could be on this panel. So thank you to many of the heroes in the room that are state leaders, district leaders, former U.S. Department of Education leaders. Amy Lloyd, I saw you back there. So thank you so much for being here for this really important topic. I'm Anna Edwards. I'm co-founder and chief advocacy officer at Whiteboard Advisors. We are an education policy firm based in DC. And for the last 20 plus years, we've been talking about aligning education and workforce. And I feel like we're really at a moment now. Maybe it's because of AI, maybe it's because of the pandemic, maybe it's because of amazing leaders like Steve Dakin and others that we have on the stage. But we really are in a moment, where high schools are changing. We're talking about the competencies students need in the workforce. And so we're really here to bring some of those conversations to life on this stage in our rapid fire 40 minutes. And first, to introduce our panelists, we have Nick Moore, the head of the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the U.S. Department of Education. He's also serving a dual role at the Department of Labor, so he'll tell you about all the hats that he wears. We have Nadja Young, she's the Chief Brand Officer at MetaMetrics. We have Steve Dakin, the Director of the Department of Education and Workforce in the state of Ohio. And we have Maria Flynn, who is the President and CEO of Jobs for the Future. So, Nick, you just flew in from DC. I would love for you to start it off today with kind of the latest on what's happening at the federal level. Obviously, you have extensive background in this issue, having served also in the governor's office in the state of Alabama before coming to DC. But you're doing a ton right now, thinking about aligning systems, the new interagency agreement, the Connecting Talent to Opportunity grant. So I think it'd be great for you to just start us off. What's happening in DC? How are you kind of echoing what's happening in the states and Washington?
Well, thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure to be part of this group, and thanks to all of you for being here with us today. It's a really exciting time in the sort of talent development space right now. Often when we think about AI, and I know that's a lot of the conversation going on right now, it's easy to navel gaze about that as a topic to where, half the country is a Luddite and we think all the jobs are going away, and the other half is irrationally exuberant and we think it's the best thing since sliced bread. But what I like to do is look at the discrete use cases. And so when we think about this sort of quixotic thing that we've been chasing for decades, certainly the whole time I've been involved in this world, the idea of connecting education and the workforce in terms of skills and competencies that we can translate course outcomes and time and credit-based learning assertions into skills that employers can understand. And I think that's the most exciting use case for AI in our world, and it's about eliminating friction in the hiring process. And so particularly in the post-COVID era, when we know that we're in a fairly tight labor market, there's thousands of people that, despite other things like the need to overcome benefits cliffs and be able to sort of have benefit slopes and transition from means-tested transfer payments a lot easier. But the other part of that is the world of sort of HRIS platforms and student information systems. Those are based on helping somebody in a fixed position as either an employee or a student. So when we think about reinvigorating mobility in the country, both social, geographic, and economic, that's something that we're really excited about, leveraging talent marketplaces. But it's not just about putting a chandelier in a haunted house of juicing up a digital transcript. It's about how do you have a credential registry that just doesn't give you a yellow pages or a phone book of different credentials, because the credential isn't really what should have value in the labor market of the future. It's the skills that that credential vouchsafes. And so it doesn't matter if it's a PhD or a short-term credential, and that's why when we get in the conversation, I hope we'll talk some about workforce Pell implementation and registered apprenticeship and the connection there. But then also making sure that somebody can translate, transact, and transcribe their learning in terms of those skills that are recognizable both on the supply and the demand side. And the era of changing accreditation and different limits on student lending and other things that we're facing in the post-secondary world, the idea of hewing post-secondary learning programs more closely to the demand side of the labor market, that's key. But it's not a one-size-all or a zero-sum game. It's the idea that we're co-designing programs with employers that are most relevant and that give students the most opportunity over time. So take a look at our Connecting Talent to Opportunity Challenge, and just shameless plug, you have until the 30th of April to apply. Governors are the key applicant because we think these need to be population level solutions that do have enough employers and institutions and students and job seekers using it to be able to create behavioral shifts both at the institution level and at the employer level. So despite all their rhetoric, the reality hasn't quite caught up with skills-based hiring, and that's because we've had to do a lot more on developing the infrastructure to make that work. And so just like there was a benign but important role in rural electrification or laying out the interstate highway, what we're trying to do is build a national public utility that is not fixed in time, but allows us to do things like updating our legacy systems like ONET or the Competency Model Clearinghouse, making those systems more real time so that we're not just using survey responses that maybe you get a 2% response rate, but as an employer customizes a skills-based job description, how can we crowdsource that and then normalize what the qualification framework of that job would look like as quick to real time as possible. So I'll close by saying why our partnership with the Department of Labor is so important is that we could have sat around for 4 years writing white papers about what is possible, knowing that the Every Student Succeeds Act or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Perkins, CTE, and the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act were aligned by design. Congress left a key sort of 20% to be defined by states, and when states have had to erect what many would argue, what I would argue is a duplicative layer of administration that is sort of predicated on trying to follow the federal pattern of having 43 different, depending on how you want to count it, or it could be more, workforce programs across 10 agencies. That's sort of like trying to spread one little jar of Nutella across 10 different loaves of bread. So what we want to do is to recognize that about 8 to 10% of federal funding supports the overall talent system in a state, right? But about 90% of the rules, whether directly or implied, come from the feds. So what we want to do is empower governors to have that 10% of their overall funding to deploy in their talent pipeline where it's most needed. And so if we think about our talent pipeline, seeing it, the forest through the trees and not just myopically about specific programs, and we're doing a lot of cross-training between CTE programs, adult education, other corpus of the public workforce system, so that people in DC can't just answer questions about one program, but so just like if somebody walks into a job center, they don't want to hear about Wagner, Pizer, or Wiola. They want somebody to sit down, listen to their family history, their work history, and then get them the Goldilocks package of training, supportive services, and a job to allow them to become self-sufficient. So we want to recognize that across that talent pipeline, if students walk into school with a 30 million word gap, or if they're not ready for school in kindergarten or first grade, or they're not literate and numerate in third and fifth grade, if we don't smooth that transition from elementary to middle to secondary school, and to ensure that students have robust career exploration activities to keep them grounded in their interests and aptitudes, and that all culminates in labor force participation and post-secondary attainment that we've got to think about concurrently. So that's our theory of action. As I say somewhat cheekily, although I think it's important to say, one big beautiful Department of Talent through the Education and what is currently Employment Training Administration, but at ETA. So we could think about it as we are trying to connect the dots all the way from the earliest years of learning through labor force participation. We've got an anemic national labor force participation rate and post-secondary attainment rate. And despite all of the policies and rhetoric of the past, we've not been able to appreciably move that. And so now's our opportunity to do it working with you.
Thanks for setting the stage there, Nick. And you joke about the one big beautiful Office of Talent in Washington, but really states have been leading on this for quite some time. And I see some folks from Colorado in the room. There was an executive order from Governor Polis about it creating an Office of Talent that would merge K-12, higher ed, and workforce. Steve, you, I think, are the first leader of a Department of Education and Workforce in Ohio. So would love for you to talk a little bit about how that role came to be under Governor DeWine, I think just since 2023, and then how that's actually translating to a different experience for students, particularly in high school or at these inflections between education and the workforce?
That's all you want me to talk about?
Oh, you know what? But you can tell.
How long do I have?
I know, right?
Wow. First of all,
Clock has started. No,
appreciate Nick's comments because it is a system. And think about the role of the federal, state, and local governments and the role of others is super important. So I guess part of the challenge was that Ohio recognized pretty early on that we have a perfect storm in our state and when it comes to employability. We have a declining birth rate and we have aging out baby boomers. I don't know why you all looked at me when I said aging out baby boomers, but I would try not to be offended. So we know we have to do something different, and our employers know. I've had the good fortune of being at different levels of the system. I was a high school principal, I was a school superintendent, I worked at a community college for 8 years, I was on the workforce development board, I was on the state board of education, and now I'm sitting in the seat that I'm sitting in. So I've seen the macro view of the system, and the system doesn't work. And increasingly, it doesn't work for a high percentage of people. It works for some. But increasingly, not so much. So our legislature, and with the governor's leadership, said, enough is enough. We've got to merge, make sure we are sending a signal to our employers and to our constituents in Ohio that education is about preparing young people for what's next. A way to earn something, whether it's the gig economy, if it's entrepreneurship, or it's getting a job. That is the job. In addition to, participating in a democratic society, blah, 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 all that. But we haven't had that focus. And so there's a couple things, I guess it goes back to my days as superintendent. So I always figure out what problem am I trying to solve. So I'm going to share a problem with you. It's data driven. So in any given year in Ohio, we have about 138,000 kids who enter high school for the first time. If you fast forward 6 years later, 68% of that cohort never earn a 2 or 4 year degree. So we're at about a 35% rate of attainment of a 2 or 4 year degree in Ohio. So how are we preparing kids then for the reality they're facing the day after they leave high school? The day after. And I always say this, I always lead with this statement because it feels very soft, but it's not, because if you unpeel the onion, it gets very deep very quick. I always said if we could have as a state, every child who leaves high school can say this upon leaving: I know who I am, I know where I want to go, and I have adults who are going to help me get there. If we could say that, what would that high school look like, by the way? Because the basic thing is, Amy was in my other one, Amy Lloyd was in my other one. She heard me say that at the last panel. I'm going to say it every panel I'm in. I don't care. Because in the end, the high school is not, the American high school is not serving an increasing percentage of kids. It's just not. And we have to acknowledge that. The data is clear. Many kids are not leaving with meaningful credentials. We don't know what skills they have. We know they set for classes. We know that. They achieve credits, whatever credit means. The diploma is not a credential in most cases. It's a proxy for spending time someplace. It's not necessarily a proxy for skills. So we have to tackle that. How long do I have? I mean, really, are you going to cut me off at some point in time?
I'm watching.
Okay.
I'm guard, Maria can give you an elbow, maybe in 2 minutes. No, that's
Great.
what everybody wants to hear.
So this past summer, I had my 50th high school reunion. Yeah, you guys can all do the math. Go ahead, I don't care. 50th high school reunion, and I went back to my old high school. My brother happened to be the superintendent there for a number of years, and so I walked the halls with kids. And I walked away knowing, it just affirmed what I believe, because I've been in high schools a long time in my life, after high school. It looked remarkably like it did 50 years ago. We had 7-period day, 50-minute periods, 3 minutes of passing time, no socialization. It's like, you realize that was built on a factory model many years ago. So we treat it as an assembly line. Go get your seat time, and so I always think about one thing we can do with the American high school. We can think about the use of time, talent, and technology. How do we use the time that we have? How do we leverage the assets called human capital, talent, both internally and externally. And how do we leverage technology to become more efficient and effective at learning? It's really those three things, those variables. So I'm going to do a couple call-outs. XQ Institute has released a set of state recommendations for policymakers around transforming the American high school. Transforming. Now, I'm old enough to remember all the words associated with high school. Restructure, rethink, redesign. You know, I remember all those. And it still looks like it did when we did all those things. So it's got to change as a society. I think we're at an inflection point with that. The other one I'll call out is the Commission on Preferred Pathways. This was a Gates-funded initiative. Ed first kind of facilitated the process. We ended up with a report. I was privileged enough to be on the commission. But it is a blueprint for how you can do this, how you can rethink the high school. And unless we do that, everything else is additive. Even when we talk about career pathways, those are additive because the inherent structure is in place that makes it less likely that all kids are going to benefit. And so we have to really think about that.
And a quick follow-up question as director. I know you're thinking about the authority you have to waive some of the existing silos. We're talking about silos between education and workforce. How are you thinking about using that waiver authority to break down barriers that might have been made sense 20 years ago, but that don't make sense now?
Yeah. So I am Oz, great, beautiful Oz. Did I take myself there? The little.
And by the way, I think Nick is also ready to waive some barriers for protecting accountability.
We're in the waiver process. We've had statute. This is Ohio in the Ohio Revised Code that the director can waive administrative rule, can waive in some cases some statute, and so we have over 1,000 governance structures in our state for education. We have 611 traditional school districts. We have 352 charter schools, and then we have another 300 plus charter non-public schools or private schools, all with their own governance structures. We are a home rule state. I can't tell a local board of education what to do. So we have to do a series of carrots and sticks kind of thing. But I do have a waiver authority. Last year, out of all those governance structures, we had 6 waivers. 6. And most of them were from Montessori schools. If that makes sense to you, right? So what are everybody doing? I mean, you don't need permission. I mean, I give you permission. In fact, I even said now we'll co-design the application. So it's pro forma. You'll know what I can waive and what I can't waive. And we'll work with you to do it. So we do have 6 or 7 high schools in one of our counties that are taking us up on that. And we're co-designing the waiver application with them. But it's time to stop the madness and start thinking about kids. And that's I'm not trying not to be very preachy here, but the adults in the room are the ones who do this. Kids need this to be done. And we got to step up to the plate.
I love that because I think it gets to the point of demand, right? So it's our employers demanding that things change, our families demanding that things change, and Maria, I feel like you're in the middle of that kind of ecosystem where you're working with employers, you're working with community colleges, and you're working with K-12 and state leaders. So I'd be curious to get your take from a systems perspective. What are you seeing that's driving the demand to change now? Is it AI? And how are you hearing those conversations across these different sectors come to be?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. First, to pick up on something Steve started with, that the systems aren't working, and I couldn't agree with that statement more. And I think that what we need to do as a field is to rally more around that fact, right? I think that we largely spend a lot of time trying to defend or protect things that we truly know aren't working well enough for learners and workers in this country. And I know a lot of folks in the audience here, like me, have been at this for a long time, like maybe a couple decades. And I think, to Anna's point, some of these issues are not new issues, right? For decades, we've had conferences where we've talked about how do we get employers more engaged with the education and workforce system, right? These aren't new topics, but I think what's new is the level of urgency, right? Because I think the change is happening now, and it's happening faster, I would argue, than our systems can keep pace. I know waivers have been brought up. I don't know, I was at Labor last week and they were telling me that they've only gotten 5 waiver requests in response to their recent guidance.
There's
promoting
another one
waivers.
coming.
Yeah, so, right, so it's like, there's this moment now where folks can take advantage, I think, of this willingness for flexibility and for trying new things, and so I would encourage folks to look at that. I do think that AI is, probably the key driver in that, and the fact that, employers continue to feel the pinch of not being able to find the skilled workers they need and feeling frustration that our traditional systems aren't keeping pace with those needs, and those needs are going to continue to accelerate. I think what frustrates me the most in this moment is I feel, again, like as a field, we're spending too much time kind of debating what AI scenario is going to play out. Is this going to be like a worst case scenario or a best case scenario or somewhere in the middle? And I think we could all spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. But we're resulting in kind of an analysis paralysis, right? Where we are thinking too much about the scenarios and not taking enough like no regret actions to actually start to get ahead of the problem. So Alex Schwartzel's here, she leads our AI work at JFF. Her team recently put out some survey results, which I thought were pretty staggering. Like 74% of early career workers today are feeling kind of their jobs being impacted by AI today. And almost as high as a number, probably maybe 40% or so, are saying that they're starting to rethink their career paths because of AI. So this isn't a tomorrow problem, this is a today problem for sure. And I would just put out like 3 examples of like no regret moves that I think we could start to take that I think build well on what I was already said. One is, I think we can take steps now to really start to reimagine what entry-level work looks like. When I think of my first jobs at the U.S. Department of Labor as a GS7 or whatever I was, right? It was things like taking notes in meetings and all these things that like really grounded me, I think, in the career that I've taken. But what are those career level, entry level tasks look like now? And how do we start actively rethinking that? We're getting ready to announce a couple winners from Google funded RFP to test out some of these early career pilots, so stay tuned for those announcements. The second I would say is, I think to Steve's point, like how we truly align these systems. So at JFF a couple years ago, back when Amy was with us, we released a report called The Big Blur, which we think has inspired some of the work in Colorado and other places to really blow up these systems and truly redesign what an experience could look like from the grades 11 through 14. We have the Big Blur 2.0 coming out shortly, so stay tuned for that, which really kind of takes that to a next level. And then third is, and I know Ohio's doing some great work around this, is to me, like, career navigation is going to be core to this. I think we are a nation that is without a career navigation system to speak of. And soon, with the changes of AI, like career navigation isn't just going to be for like kids coming out of high school. I think like all young people and adults are going to have better information on what their options are, how you know what quality is, and a system that can kind of keep pace with the changes that we're seeing.
For sure, and starting earlier. I think everyone agrees on that as well. And I love the idea of what are the steps we can take now and the little ways that we can start to align systems without waiting for the big moment to happen that's happening in front of our eyes. And Nadja, I feel like that's the work that you've been talking a lot about, which is measurement and how do we actually help to bridge the gap in how we communicate the skills that the students have and what employers are looking for. And I think at MetaMetrics, you've been taking a deep look even about how we can communicate academic competencies to employers and to the workforce. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about the topic of measurement.
Sure, thank you, Nana. Honored to be here and a privilege. Very passionate about this topic. I was a CTE teacher for 7 years, so have dedicated the early part of my career toward helping students attain work and life skills to go be successful in whatever they want to do. And then I spent the last 15 years building big data systems with a big tech company as all states were trying to build longitudinal data systems. And we learned a lot through that work, which is, it is complex and hard. Ohio and Alabama already tackled the people part of the problem, which is the data sharing MOUs and the governance structures to be better aligned. But then you have all of these legacy data systems that frankly they're still working to modernize. And you'll never have just one ultimate data system. You're gonna have an influx of continuous new software and open source systems and all these different data systems that influence and circle a child are going to measure outcomes or progress in slightly different ways. Then you put your parent hat on, those of us who are parents or former educators, and we know that we receive test scores. If we just look at something as simple as a test score, we receive test scores for our children on different scales from different tests. They change over time. Proficiency bars change over time. So it's very difficult to make sense of it all. But and then much less to try to contemplate how that translates into career readiness. But there are a couple of universal or as close to universal frameworks as we have out there that are used widely in the education industry. And that is the Lexile framework for reading and Quantile framework for math that are basically very, it's not a simplistic scale, but what the output is meant to be simplistic, to say what's a student's reading comprehension ability, and what is the text complexity of any piece of text that they might be reading, so that you can try and map books and passages and learning materials to a student's ability and help them progress on that trajectory. And then on the quantile side, same thing. What is their math ability and what is the complexity of a math function or a math project or problem that needs to be performed? So because these have been used for about 45 years, there are over 100 million pieces of content that have already been tagged with a Lexile or Quantile, and about 40 million students that receive these measures either through tests that they take in school or curriculum that they're using or ed tech products that they're using. So it's already sort of out there. So then that led to the interesting part. Okay, we have this longitudinal data on a universal scale. And the team at MetaMetrics spent about 2 years, and Matt Spindler's in the room, he is a big part of it, looking at 600 careers in the ONET database that Nick mentioned, many of which were bright outlook careers, so your high growth, high wage careers. And we looked at the thousands of pieces of reading and math materials that an entry-level worker would need to access in those 600 careers. So this massive corpus of content. So we were able to very reliably say what the Lexile range and the Quantile range would be for a worker to be ready to meet the demands of those careers at the entry-level point. So now that we have that in a big database, now that can be used by all of the different AI tutoring tools and the curriculum providers and different data systems that states might be building, right? So that they can start to very clearly and simply connect the dots for a student and draw that line as to where are you today, where do you want to go, what does your gap look like, and how do we help you reduce that gap? How do we help you get there? So I'll give a couple of just concrete examples using Ohio and Alabama, since those are the states on the stage. So if I'm a student in Ohio today, and let's say I'm an 11th grader and I have a Lexile score of 1300, that tells the teacher and the parent and the student that they're pretty much college ready. 1300 is about the Lexile level that most post-secondary materials are written in. But in the real world, that translates to the ability to read an IRX tax notice. Today is April 13th. Have we all filed our taxes? We have 2 days. Everyone's going on TurboTax right now in their seat. Get on it tonight if you haven't yet. So this student can access post-secondary materials. She can do her taxes and understand the implications. She can read and understand a bank credit card agreement. Wonderful. But a 1300 Lexile is not actually high enough to fully comprehend a lease agreement. We're all going to go out there and get a lease one day when we rent our first place. Or to understand and access the privacy notice for Airbnb. In fact, the New York Times measured websites of 150 very popular companies that you'd probably go to their website every day, just the privacy notices for how they use data. And they're almost all at a Lexile level about 1440 or above. So much higher level than most readers are coming out of high school with that ability to access. So it just shows you kind of real life gaps that exist. But what does it mean when we start looking at that career data that I mentioned in the mapping to the ONET database? So in Ohio, I looked at your top 10 fastest growing careers.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that same student with the 1300 Lexile is ready for 5 of your top 10 fastest growing careers.
Director of Department of Education Workforce.
That's right. Nailed it. Actually, she's way past. You didn't need a Lexile that high.
That's hurtful.
No. So she's interested in healthcare, The data tells us she's ready to be a nurse practitioner. She has a high enough reading ability to be a nurse practitioner, but not quite high enough to be a physician's assistant or an epidemiologist. So if she wants a higher paying job in the healthcare industry, she can see pretty early on what her gap might be, and she has time to get there, and teachers can help her remediate. In Alabama, I'll look at math. So if I'm a middle schooler, we can take it back to middle school, because again, all of our jobs in this industry is to try and intervene sooner, to open more doors for kids and make sure that they don't go through all this hard work through 12th grade and then have doors shut before them that they didn't even realize that they weren't ready for. So if I'm an 8th grader in Alabama and I have a quantile measure of 800, that means I can calculate tax and the tip when I go to a restaurant. So hopefully I've been taught good manners, I'm a good tipper, but I can do the math right regardless. And I could look at cost reductions in a retail store. If I'm trying to take a coupon and spread it across multiple items that I'm buying, I can do that math. But if I'm in 8th grade and I'm starting some career exploration work, because a lot of states now are doing this navigation work, I'm glad you mentioned that, Maria, there are a lot of bills passed, it's very often interest-based, not always aptitude-based. So they're talking about what they're interested in doing, but I could know right now in 8th grade that if I want to have a certain job, I might need to really work on math. So in this case, I can look at a projection and say, well, by the time I graduate, I'll likely have a 1080 quantile, I'll be at a 1080 quantile level, which means I'd be ready for 5 of Alabama's top 10 fastest growing careers. I'd be ready to be successful as a cook, a nurse practitioner, a marine engineer, a naval architect, and an information security analyst. But I would still have quite a gap if I wanted to be a statistician or an electric mechanical technologist. So we can get that precise, and kids can start thinking about the fields they want to be in and know that there's a whole constellation of careers available or jobs available within a field, and they can start to get serious about their planning. I think the exclamation point on it, which you asked, Anna, is why does it matter? Why do we need to get more precise and concrete earlier? And it was mentioned as you were talking about post-secondary, we have a real truth in lending problem in our country today. The cost of going to college and getting a 4-year degree is way higher than when we all sat through it. And so students go through all of this time and put all the work in and walk out with massive debt, sometimes only to find out that, that it's gonna be really tough to pay that back. And so then there might not be jobs in the market anymore with the type of degree that they attained. And so we're just not keeping up with the market trends and preparing them for the jobs of tomorrow and making sure that those investments are aligned.
The other interesting part of what you bring up, I think, is relevance. And I think we all know that there's a chronic absenteeism problem in this country. And I think a lot of that is because students don't necessarily see that what they're learning in school is relevant to their future careers. And what you're talking about is actually demonstrating why students need to learn those skills and competencies and aligning those to careers. So it's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Steve, I'd be curious to get your take. I know you talk a lot about student agency. Do you think communicating the skills and competencies more clearly that students need for the future workforce will actually help them to take better ownership over their learning pathway?
I do.
Good.
You do.
Sorry.
That's a yes.
It is a yes. Yes. Period. But what I'm struck by is how does this information get in the hands of kids? How does it get in the hands of parents? Who then, how do we help them understand what that really means and how it translates into what I got to do next? So this goes back to the structure of schools. Where does that happen? If we think counselors can do that, their loads are incredible in most high schools. They can't possibly, I had 4 counselors for 2,000 students in my high school. Just do the math. For them to sit down and have a 10-minute conversation with every kid, not going to happen. So we have to figure out different structures because this data is really, really important. We're going to release a high school feedback report to every one of our high schools later this spring that will show kids who went through a CTE program what they're doing 6 years out. We'll know what their wages are, we know where they're employed, we know blah, blah, blah. That is going to be phenomenal information in the hands of a lot of people and how that translates then into what we do. So it's going to show ROIs in career tech programs, right? and not all programs are going to show a healthy ROI. And so then the question becomes, now what? Do we discourage kids from doing that? No, you don't discourage them, but you make sure they understand it. You know, it's like you know, when kids sit down and say, we're going to go to college. Okay, well, what's your major? You know, what's the ROI on that major? How much debt are you going to incur? You know, we don't have those conversations in our high schools, largely speaking. And the parents usually are not part of that conversation. And so I go back to the structure of how we think. Like, I went to advisories. Every adult in my high school was an advisor to 15 kids for 4 years. You know, I didn't ask them to be experts in financial aid or anything like that. I asked them to set, they were brokers. So if a kid has an interest, and they're all designed to start designing a plan. You know, some people call them career plans. I just call them a plan for life. I mean, who knows what the hell they're going to do in high school? Really? How many of you are doing things that you thought, you went, even with your college, if you went to college and got a degree, are you still working in that field? Most of us would probably say no. And so I want kids to understand what's next. And so taking the information that you just shared, line it with labor market data, right? Get to that aptitude conversation, because that is really, really important. And so I'm pushing career planning in our state. We call it career planning because I know the legislature likes to hear about workforce, but to me it's a plan for life. I think every kid should have a mentor of some sort. A lot of kids do, but not everybody does. And I think that's incredibly important for young people. And so career planning is a big policy push. I thought I had it in this budget until the conference committee, they pulled it out. Even though we require a graduation plan by statute. Every kid has to have a plan to graduate, but they don't have to plan.
Mandates? What?
What? Unfunded mandates? You're already doing it, for God's sakes. So I think all that's important. We are revising our industry recognized credential list because we have a list of a lot of credentials that do not have value in the workplace. That's false advertisement to our parents and kids. So we're revising that through the work of Accenture. Walton Foundation funded it. Accenture, Watershed Advisors, and Ohio Excels. We're going to have that list ready in May for draft, and we have to convene a committee to vet it. That would be of the stakeholders involved, and then we'll have it, and we're going to align. Right now, kids can earn a series of credentials to get to a diploma, and right now, CPR is a credential. Now, in my advancing age, do I want a kid to know CPR? Yeah. Yes. But it doesn't have value in the workplace like other credentials do. And so we are committed to making sure that credential list does reflect value propositions for employers.
Nick, I'm curious to get your take, because you mentioned coming back to Workforce Pell, but on this topic of industry recognized credentials and helping to communicate out the value and impact and ROI, how are you thinking about that at the Department of Labor?
Well, that's another point of why our partnership between Ed and Labor is important. You know, in Perkins CTE, there's a definition of high skill and high wage, but then WIOA has or in-demand industry sector occupation. So if you pull all those together, as Workforce Pell does, then it's really important for you to have at the state level the governor, the state workforce board, CTE leaders working together to come up with a regional and statewide list of in-demand jobs. And then adding of value or of quality at the end of that recognized post-secondary credential. So that's why we're really focusing on states in the midst of this sort of heady days or salad days of Workforce Pell implementation, also submitting combined WIOA and Perkins state plans. Because there's really not a better artifact to not only demonstrate alignment, whether it's a site selector or somebody looking to come do business in your state. It's something that is voluntary, but heretofore only 9 states have done it. But due to the fact that we've removed some of the red tape.
I have some state leaders in the room ready to take you up on it. So.
Please do, and if you need anything to make it happen, let me know. We can talk about how it aligns with some of the other waivers we're doing too through ETA around governance structure and other things. But I'm thinking about to double the number that submit combined plans, and that's in the middle of a 2-year modification cycle, which is unprecedented. I think we've pretty much only lost states during a modification cycle, not added states. So you don't have to do a cumbersome notice and comment period if you just lift and shift the Perkins plan into the WIOA portal, and then you can do some other things as you go forward. But there's also something called a comprehensive local needs assessment. Before, the department required every specific LEA to do one of those, and you can still do that. But you can also do a regional one. So if you look at the local workforce area, as those line up with WIOA, you could have your Perkins and your WIOA stakeholders coming together, doing stakeholder input and the CLNA together, and that would give you that regional list of in-demand jobs. And as you mentioned, making sure that we're not selling wood nickels to folks, particularly students. Not all credentials are of value, and if too many bureaucrats like me get around the table and they're the ones that putting the list together, oftentimes things arrive on the list that aren't really connected to labor market demand. So also using your primary LMI, because Perkins 5 allows for the use of Wagner-Pfizer and LMI data. So, and there's nothing wrong with secondary sets of LMI, but making sure that you're using primary LMI, because it doesn't get better than that, is also going to help prepare the state. So if you come up and you put some additional meat on the bone, high skill, high wage, or in-demand jobs, and recognize post-secondary credential of quality, that is the common denominator, as long as you got the governor and the state workforce board involved, to make sure that it doesn't end up becoming more difficult to get a workforce Pell program approved than it would to say get a PhD approved through your state SHIO or so on. So it's a high bar because of 70% completion placement, value-added earnings thresholds got to be stackable and portable. So I think many states and institutions are going to be looking at quality over quantity, and that's a good thing, particularly as there's a sort of a 3-year transition period. But when you think about the need for better use of administrative data, updating and modernizing UI wage records, this is a forcing mechanism, particularly when you add in Medicaid and SNAP work requirements for states to get serious about workforce Pell and about data mobility. And certainly we can't let this end up like eligible training provider lists through WIOA, which if you've seen one, you've seen one. Some are great, some is just a smorgasbord of every potential program you could have thrown on there, and they're never culled and they're never sort of curated. So all in all, if we get some of the system out of the money, we make this system more easy for folks to navigate, and we empower governors and states to take advantage of these common definitions, I think we're going to have and the fact that we only got around 400 comments on workforce Pell compared to the thousands of comments that we got on the thing from the first negotiated rulemaking on student loan limits shows I think we at least got somewhere close to the right.
Yeah, great point. Well, I know we're almost out of time. We didn't get to talk about durable skills. So I'm hoping one of you will talk about durable skills in this last question, because I think there is a lot of talk about, of course, the hard skills that students have, the academic skills, but we do hear from employers that these non-academic competencies, durable skills, are really important too. But I'm curious, as each of you, rapid fire, thinks about the single biggest barrier to connecting education and workforce, or the biggest unlock. What do you think that is? And then if it relates to assessing durable skills, hit on that. Otherwise, we'll come back for a different panel. But yeah, Maria, do you want to hit us off? What's the biggest unlock in breaking down the silos between education and workforce?
To me, it's really thinking about getting individuals into a quality job as a united goal that we can all agree on, and how can that be a forcing mechanism to better align incentives across these systems. And my 10 seconds on durable skills is my advocacy would be to let's stop spending money coming up with lists of what those durable skills are. Every list that's been published on it in the past 30 years pretty much has the same thing on it. So let's not invest in those anymore. Let's rather invest in how are we actually capturing, the skills that people are demonstrating, in the classroom or in work, and actually have that apply to something.
Awesome. Steve?
Ditto on Maria's last comment about durable skills. I want to know how to measure them, and then be able to talk about whether or not kids have actually demonstrated the use of those durable skills. I think that's career-connected learning in some sense. I think the big takeaway for me is there's got to be kind of an infrastructure set up in states. I use the phrase regional infrastructure set up to be that intermediary between employers and education providers. If you want kids to experience continuum of career-connected learning, there has to be somebody that sits between to help navigate that, usher that, be the logistics around it. Small, medium-sized businesses don't have the bandwidth to do it. So, and I will tell you this right now, the employers in Central Ohio tell me, we don't need 46 traditional school districts knocking on our door for an internship for kids. We need somebody to vet that.
Right. Nadja.
I'll throw you a bone on durable skills as well.
Thank you.
I think, yes, many groups have tried to do it. It's hard to be done well. It's an imperfect science. And I agree, Maria, don't put together another task force to try to come up with a list. Just go talk to your chambers of commerce. They'll tell you what they need, and your workforce development offices. They'll tell you where the gaps are, why they can't get people into jobs. That's number one. But make sure that if you are using an assessment that's trying to assess durable skills, then that it's backed by a framework that has some academic rigor. There is research out there that says higher reading comprehension rates increase empathy, your research skills, your communication skills. So there's reports out there from Forbes and Harvard Business Impact that show that correlation. So there can be some science behind these durable skills assessments, and ETS is trying to build this right now with their Skills for the Future initiative being piloted in 6 states. But also listening is a really interesting one for leadership. So leadership skills are it's keenly important that you have deep listening skills. We tried to develop a listening framework years ago, and the market wasn't really that interested in the US. We didn't have development partners wanting to spend time with us on that. Internationally, we did, because English language acquisition is so important for people from other countries to get employed in America. But I think that now maybe the market's come along, and so if there are people who are interested in investigating that, we'd love to dust that work back off and see what can be done there. But ultimately, internships and real job experience are what is going to show and allow students to demonstrate those durable skills, and we see such higher rates of employment coming out of internships, and that might be the great equalizer for high school students, where parents don't have maybe the connectedness and the relationships and the network to give kids those opportunities, but if schools can be giving them those internship opportunities, it could be a real game changer for them.
Awesome. Well, Nick, I think you already covered a million unlocks, but do you want to have the last word?
Assessments, demonstration, artifact, portfolio-based assessments that are commercially viable and scalable. And we've got to modernize disparate impact as it relates to skills-based hiring. What was designed to protect people from being screened out has now, quite ironically, become sort of an inertia on companies with an HR attorney or any legal office to want to evaluate people for skills rather than general proxies. So until we make those two big unlocks on assessment and modernizing our sort of national disparate impact theory around hiring, we're not going to see skills-based hiring go to scale, and separating skills from degree proxies won't really come to fruition. We'll just get into a labor market that's focused on reskilling and retraining, and then this will maybe come back up in 10 more years.
Okay, so there's work to be done. Thank you guys so much.